Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hey there, you have found the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. And as the Digital Enterprise Society is preparing for the Digital Intersect event that will be happening on November 17th, we thought we would bring you an episode from the archives featuring Peter Bilello. And he is from CIMData, and this episode is all about navigating disruption and improving resiliency with PLM. Please enjoy this classic episode of the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. To learn more, go visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show every single week with Craig Brown. Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, here we are again.
Yeah. Hey, Thom, here we are. And, and we're into winter. It was amazing. The last 48 hours, the leaves have fallen off the trees. It's just, partly it got really cold where we are here in Michigan, and then the winds kicked in yesterday, and that's usually all it takes. So here we go.
I'm spending 10 days at the end of November here, right about now in Chicago. So I will get to experience what you live in.
And I'll remind you in December when we get there.
So every single week, Craig and I work hard to bring to all of you who are listening. We want to bring you interesting interviews and other ideas to help everyone enhance and grow their careers. And today we have Peter Bilello. And he is the president and CEO of CIMData. Now, he has been with CIMData for 26 years. The company itself is 36 years old, so he's been there for most of the run. And what he does is he tells industrial companies what they should do. He helps them get the right products to the right markets at the right time. Hey, Peter, welcome. Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Happy to be here, Thom. Thank you very much, Craig. Thank you. It's good to see you guys and looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Well, Peter, can you give us a little bit of your background besides just what I read?
Yeah. So a few years ago now, before the CIMData engagement, I worked for a U.S. Department of Energy for a short period of time, kind of research as I was going through college, where I got some degrees, both in systems engineering or manufacturing systems engineering, and also computer science and physics that kind of allow me to see what the real world is a lot about, not all about, but a lot about. And then I actually worked for General Motors in the automotive component area of General Motors until they spun it out. And of course, it's not anywhere near where it was at that point when I was with the company. It was $25 billion organization. Now it's been split into many little different pieces. But that's where I really got into PLM, or what we talk about PLM today. So it was in those days at GM was the C4 program. And I had a lot of responsibilities within, which became Delphi at some point, or was Automotive Component Group when I joined, on their strategies around engineering IT. So that's kind of where I learned a lot about what PLM is today, and continue to build that out in my responsibilities as part of CIMData.
Well, Peter, it's good to hear you, and it's great to be in a discussion again. We talked here at the podcast, I think it was 2 years. You were a part of our first round as Thom and I were getting this going. And all of us in our different points of view have been through this wonderfully terrible pandemic, really quite a crisis, really quite scary at times. And yet, as you have pointed out, and folks from your company have pointed out, there's been a surprising number of successful companies these last 2 years. And so we, at the Digital Enterprise Society, we came across an article that you wrote in Design News, and that was kind of spurred us to have this discussion today. So let's start with that. It is surprising that companies which are booming despite the pandemic. Why? What's your insight?
Well, there's a couple of factors I think are going on. First thing I'd kind of comment on is, you have challenges and you have opportunities, and they're kind of the same coin, right? So on one side is opportunities, on the other side is challenges. So companies that have seen the challenges have used taken advantage of it because of opportunities. Now, but it varies a lot by industry. I mean, some industries like commercial aerospace just hammered. I mean, it's just because their customers were hammered. The airlines of the world. But there still doesn't mean there's not opportunities, and doesn't mean they haven't been looking at PLM. But things have slowed down some. But in other industries, For example, anyone that's selling a product into, well, food and beverage, of course, that we all have to eat, so that hasn't changed. Retail has changed somewhat, perhaps, but there's not a lot of PLM in retail, so we don't see a whole lot of that one way or the other. But then into goods and services that are related to the general consumer that have more money because they're not traveling anymore. So a lot of people just didn't take vacations for the first year or so. So if you look at things like bicycles, I mean, companies we work with in the bicycle industry just going nuts. Companies that are supporting anything around logistics are really hammered and can't work fast enough. Aerospace and defense, the defense side really hasn't had that much of an impact, except for changing the way they work. So, used to be on site and everything had to be secure. Well, all of a sudden they had to figure out, how do I distribute work to home and drive things that way as well. So it's kind of varied. The impact on the organizations have varied based upon what they make or deliver to market. And there's been a lot of very successful companies that just can't build fast enough. And it has nothing to do with the logistics issues, which exist as well, of course, but that has a lot to do with timing and when shutdown was and when orders were stopped and a lot of other stuff. And then, ports being backed up and so on. But, they just can't build fast enough because their orders have gone so dramatically high. And then you get into other kind of goods, again, that people would spend money on when they're staying at home, electronics, weights, anything or like a physical exercise type things, bicycles, as I mentioned already, and so on. So I think that's what we've really seen is an explosion in a number of industries, not one or two, but actually dozens, and some others that have more negatively hit, but even they have been figuring out, how do I deal with disruption, which is kind of the name of the game right now.
So did PLM help the winners in each of those segments, or the guys that are really successful, which is one measure of winning? Was PLM a key thing? The ones that practice PLM better, and we always argue about PLM. We do mean product lifecycle management, not parts. But was that an enabler, or do you see in the research you guys do? Can you see the guys that do that better are on the top? Their margins are actually better?
As a general comment or a general, let's say, finding, yes. But I will add that there's plenty of companies that don't really, let's say on one side, people all do PLM, right? There's always, as a PLM as a strategy, people are managing their product lifecycle now, usually disconnected. They may not be as optimized as it should be because they don't have a full end-to-end view of it. So companies, again, successful companies continue to be successful because of hard work. I mean, that's usually the fundamental thing that makes a company successful. It's its people. But those that already have a good PLM foundation and have an understanding of being able to collaborate, manage information, collaborate information, manage the processes from an extended enterprise perspective, certainly have been able to, and has demonstrated their ability to address the changing work, atmosphere, but also changing demand more quickly than those that don't have that fundamental foundational elements of product lifecycle management as we see it today. But there's still a lot of companies that don't have it that are also seeing it to be even more critically needed to be more, let's say, repeatable in their businesses, so that again they can deal with disruptions more smoothly, more efficiently.
I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, I was, talking to a few GMers that were still working there, and it started out as, well, we only go into the office when we absolutely have to, some sort of meeting thing, and then we're all masked up. And then 6 months later, I asked them again. They're like, well, we're able to get work done without going to the office, so we're not going to the office as much. And then 6 months later, I asked, so what's the plan? We kind of had a lull there a little bit ago and looked like people might go back sooner. And they said, oh no, we're actually more productive at home. And I'm listening and they're like, well, you must not have kids or other complications. But the point was, it kept changing over the cycle of this pandemic and the different waves we've been through. And I saw some research. I think the folks at Altair were helping fund it. And it's interesting. There are a growing number of companies now that are forming a policy that you shall work remotely, and you'll only get together when there's either a key build or some reason you have to do problem solving, and it would be better done face to face. everything else is being done through what we're using, Zoom and recording and so on. Kind of interesting.
I do think there is one issue that we're going to see, but it's a lagging issue, and that is innovation. I mean, innovation, it happens haphazardly. I mean, it does. I mean, it's combination usually of people working together and thinking outside the box, right? I mean, just a simple form. But if you're not working together and having those side conversations at lunch, at the water cooler, the coffee station, wherever it might be, a lot of that can be missed. And I still remember discussions some years ago at Bose, a corporation, where they had a policy at one time. They've changed this policy since Dr. Bose passed away, but that you could not have anything at your desk, any food or drink at your desk, or in conference rooms for that matter.
Right.
They were encouraged to go to the cafeteria, which was open all the time. Encouraged, I mean, Dr. Bose and his academic background it's about collaboration, and collaboration's about getting people to discuss things, especially people that don't normally work together. So that's the only part of working remotely that worries me, is how do we drive collaboration in a way that's more not pre-programmed, like events like this, but that are haphazard in a way that allows people to cross-think, cross-talk. And that's difficult because you just don't run into people without scheduling an event, right? Scheduling a Zoom call, go-to-meeting call, or whatever it might be. So there's some interesting dynamics that we're going to have to see how those wash out. But I know, talking to friends at Ford in the Detroit area as well, where some of the people have been told, you will never come back to work. And now I think that might change over time, depending on what companies want to control. Right? People usually are in a facility for working together and for oversight. Yeah. And so we'll see how that pans out over perhaps a few years to come, also depending on what the pandemic does.
You remind me of we used to go through this in management training. It's like, okay, are you a manager that measures the value of the work products of your employees, or are you the manager that goes and counts noses every morning? And the less capable managers, they were good administrators maybe, but they weren't leaders of innovation teams, or the ones that counted noses. So those guys must be having a hard time right now, because what do? You check if people are on the network. I mean, it's pretty bizarre. Anyways, so another technology that's been a lot talked about is artificial intelligence and machine learning. Yeah. And talking about that in connection with PLM is starting to gain a bit of momentum. Are those working together? I mean, what's happening? What do you see the industry, the solution providers starting to provide? What's going to happen?
Yeah, I think there's some very interesting work going on in the application or embedding of AI, various types of AI like machine learning and so on, within different application sets. In the bigger picture, kind of where a lot of this has come out from a PLM perspective has been in big data, of course. Understanding data from smart connected devices that help you better understand, for example, what the product is being used for, which then can be wrapped around back into the concepts or improvements for product. And there's still a lot of work going on there. There's some interesting technologies out there and approaches like topology data analysis that instead of taking a lot of AI is about, well, let me think about what the issue could be, and that's my hypotheses, and then I go ahead and put that into the data and then say, is that true or not? Where topology data analytics actually says, what is my data really? Topology is about shapes and measuring of shapes and various forms. Says, well, here's what the data says, and groupings of data and other things, which then you can go drill into then. And that shaping of the data comes from AI and machine learning that kind of revolves the thinking of around that data set or the large data sets that can be dealt with. But then the other areas that we see AI is kind of embedded into computer-aided design tools. Certainly CAD, we're seeing more of that, and simulation as well, where again, machine learning is quite common to say, okay, a simple example would be, if you do this analysis, you probably also should do this analysis, because either there's certain facets of that analysis that would indicate that you've done that before. So just learning kind of your process itself, or it could be built-in best practices that are not just codified, but evolved from, again, learnings that exist from the reuse and reuse of that product or that application. So I think we're going to see more of that also in various technologies, as we can not duplicate the user's experience, but supplement the user experience with additional guidance that is, again, based on knowledge that comes from maybe the whole group of people using that technology and not just one individual.
Yeah, I think the engineers that you learn in school the scientific method and form a hypothesis and then test it. The test engineers still do that, though they're constrained by whatever design they've been given. This idea that you could now formulate a hypothesis on something you haven't yet built, but you could explore it and then see what that might provide you in terms of either a more robust product or a less expensive product, right? And provide you ways of lowering costs that you maybe hadn't considered. So interesting. Well, CIMData is a research company, and you look at market trends, both from the solution provider's point of view, the guys selling tools, as well as from those industrial giants you've been referring to. What do you see coming on the horizon? And a little bit, has that adjusted over the last 2 years? I mean, has it changed the priorities of these folks?
From the solution provider side of it, those that are providing the software and services, especially the software guys, I think there's been a speed up of moving towards SaaS, not just the licensing aspect of software as a service, but also more of a cloud-based delivery of those capabilities. So that seems to have sped up, and I think some of it's directly because of the pandemic. It's easier, and the perception's there, and I think it's reality as well, to sell a SaaS-based solution. I think it's easier for industrial companies to absorb it into the organization. And others, from a cost perspective, but also,
it's certainly easier for the small company, the startup that can't afford what we did at General Motors, right? But they can all of a sudden rent some time from Amazon, and they're running state of the art CAE analysis, right? So
exactly,
it is coming. Anything else?
We've already talked about AI and machine learning. That's certainly an area that's gaining momentum as well within the PLM space. And I think probably the third is really kind of the true enablement of the life cycle. What I mean by that is we've talked about life cycle, and even in the PDM days, you think about products, and life cycle portfolio management's always been about getting the right products, the right market, right time, all that wonderful stuff. So we've been really attempting to enable that, and in a more holistic manner, forever. I mean, that's what companies have always done. But the technologies that go support it have been hit and miss. They've been more, again, in the PLM space, they've been a lot more focused on engineering, not really life cycle. But today, as compared to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and so on, there are a number of technologies today that really can bring that more end-to-end connectivity and make that data management from an end-to-end perspective available to really truly enable the digital sets of digital twins as appropriate and digital thread. Now, I'm going to say something a little bit more about digital thread, because at CIMData, one of the things that we're trying to describe and how our thinking is evolving or needs to evolve, everyone's thinking, is around digital webs or networks of information. Because if you think about the information set that we manage, we have to be able to look at that and extract from that certain views of information. And we talked about multi-view bombs forever, but again, the technologies today really can do that. And it was a struggle in the past. Enterprise bomb and all these things that some of the solution providers have been trying to enable for automobile industry, for example. Yeah, it's getting there. It's getting pretty close, actually. But we've been talking about that for 25, 30 years, or at least 20 years, if not more than that. But I see the maturity now really being able to provide that end-to-end connectivity, the configuration management that's needed for not just simple products, but much more complex products. Now, I'll argue they may or may not be robust enough, bulletproof enough for the most complex products. But at the same time, it's impressive. We did a work with our A&D action group, which we support a big action group in all the major commercial, mainly commercial side of the aerospace industry, doing some benchmarking on the leading PLM products around multi-view bill of material and how that's being enabled. And we were impressed how far they've come, that they really can deliver that now as compared to what we saw maybe 5 to 10 years ago.
And looking in a web to find a pattern you want, that sure sounds like an AI problem, right? Because that's what AI is really good at, is finding patterns in the haystack, if you will. So I I think you're right. I think this will be an interesting development, and it won't be just the big companies that go after it, because again, the cost of entry has gone down so much. And if you need high-powered HPC, you just got to go call Amazon. And I know everybody thinks Amazon delivers the next box of cereal, but it also delivers compute services. The AWS side of Amazon is really, really interesting. Some of the stuff they're up to.
Yes.
So another theme in your write-up in Design News was the chaos around us, and of course the last 18 months have made it even worse. But then about resiliency and how everything we're talking about can improve your resiliency. These current logistics supply chain challenges look like a shortcoming in viewing, are we resilient to supply chain disruptions? Well, based on inflation at the moment, maybe not. But I guess my point is how do you see these things coming together? You made a convincing argument in the paper about chaos can be managed, and when you're managing it, if your resiliency is improving. And so how does PLM make that happen, or is it also a management cultural thing?
Well, some of it's cultural. It always comes down to people at some extent, but to be able to understand how you respond to a disruption you have to understand what's going on to begin with. And you think about optimization. I always go back to my roots around systems engineering, manufacturing systems engineering, and the theory of constraints. And the theory of constraints, for those that may not know it, is basically you always look at where the constraint is. So if there's a flow of material through a plant or a flow of information through a process, the limiting factor is going to be wherever the constraints are. So if I'm looking to work and get product out to market and deliver the right products to the right market, I have to figure out where my constraints are. So if things change, inputs change. I all of a sudden, let's say in manufacturing, for example, and I'll bring it around to PLM directly. Mm-hmm. Okay, certain products are not, or subcomponents aren't available. Well, what do I do?
Right.
Well, do I have a big enough picture of my system, manufacturing in this case, that says, well, this input doesn't exist, but these other inputs exist. Can I model that quick enough to make the changes? And so we've seen applications of this around PLM, digital manufacturing aspects of PLM, where you have the manufacturing facility as a digital twin, where you can then model what if scenarios very quickly, saying, okay, this is a shortage. Okay, but I have these other products that have these equipment that's available. What else can I produce? So I can produce other things that are saleable. I must take advantage of that, and I can understand. And that also means I engineer my manufacturing facility to be flexible.
Yeah.
So there's PLM again, and maybe also going back to product, my product to be configurable in a way that allows me to build different options and variances depending on if there's something missing or not within the value chain. So there's a lot of different applications to prepare a company to be more flexible.
One of the things that I have been debating with people is about this resiliency thing might not be the same dimension, the same set of decisions if you're always cost focused, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about some of those plants that you and I probably both dealt with over our careers that in fact built ventilators during the beginning of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And in one case in particular could build chips again. And maybe they should build chips again since we Americans put way too much of our chip manufacturing offshore for cost reasons. I mean, at the time, it seemed like the right decision, but now that we can't get them into the country because of shipping delays and manufacturing delays in Asia, it's really, really, really amazing that the resiliency of the supply chain wasn't more carefully considered, especially the car guys. We reacted to Fukushima and fixed that supply chain efficiency, but you would have thought somebody would have done it down the chip thing. Well, chips they're just everywhere, right? And I think everybody started treating them like commodities, and surprise, they're not. They're not strictly a commodity. Tesla has been more vocal than anybody else about how fast they could change a particular generation of a chip they were using in one of their vehicles. And of course, it was a lot of work because you had to retest the software, you had to rebuild it and all that kind of stuff. But in fact, they were able to come out with it pretty quickly. Now, the other car guys, I'm very sure, are doing the same thing. They just don't talk about it. But this resiliency, this manufacturing flexibility to use an alternative part or an alternative subsystem is really a big deal. And of course, PLM can help that because we could do the virtual assessment
Exactly.
without physical prototypes, which of course is faster.
I think this whole area of optimization, product optimization, process optimization, and then true systems of systems, right? The product certainly can be a system of systems, but that product exists within many systems of systems, manufacturing system of systems, logistics, supply chain, support, and so on. And so, companies, again, to be resilient, have to be able to adjust. There'll be disruptions, but can they adjust fast enough so it's not a major disruption or not a fatal disruption?
Yeah, I remember long before I had the PLM assignment, I was managing a controller, right, an engine controller, and that actually was on the sourcing list as a question was, what happens if this plant's no longer available? What's the backup plan? Is it another plant at that company, or is it another plant that we own, or whatever? And I just wonder if people are, I don't know anymore. I wonder if people were asking that question right before the pandemic. You kind of think maybe not, right?
You made a very good point about the reason that a lot of this has happened is because of cost. And it's a pet peeve of mine. The cost of a part or a cost of assembling of a part doesn't drive the cost that much. The cost is driven by how you engineer something. It's the engineering of the product and it's engineering of the manufacturing process. And if you don't get that right, then you're just chasing small amounts, basically. Yeah, I can go get it a penny cheaper or 5 cents or whatever it is. But if I engineered it the beginning with, maybe it was half the price, and maybe it can produce at half the price. And that's where the focus really should be, is up front. So
given the market insights, given what we've been going through with the pandemic, what's your advice to our listeners? They're largely PLM practitioners. There's some of the solution providers, but our audience is mostly people who have been doing virtual design now from home, but by and large, they are the forefront of digital technologies for PLM. Is there an area they should pay attention to? I think a lot of them are probably wary of AI, maybe just because they're ignorant. But I'm curious, what's your advice to them? What should they be doing in their spare time?
First question I would ask is, are you document-centric or data-centric? And, I'm sure you know this, Craig, as well as you go back in history, most of it was document-oriented type processes that we used to develop, and still a lot of the quote PLM implementations are based on documents, and they can only get you so far. Documents hide a lot of information, a lot of knowledge that can be extracted from them, and we're just locking them away and throwing away the key almost. So that's the first thing I would look at in my own organization and say, hey, am I data-centric or am I document-centric? If I'm document-centric, I need to start figuring out, how do I unlock the value? Full checks retrieval and some other things can help, but it's still missing kind of the real power of information. The next thing I would take a look at then beyond that is, if I have data, am I model based in any way? I'm not just talking about 3D models, but I'm talking about information models. That could be a structures around requirements. It certainly can be 2D, 3D, 4D models, or 0D models, 1D models, and so on.
Yeah.
And driving models so that I have constructs, information constructs, which can be leveraged for other purposes, can be connected for the life cycle through the digital webs, digital threads. And I can really then unlock the power of information, because at the end of the day, the company runs on information. I mean, that's what we run on. We just have a lot of disconnections at times. So that's kind of how I would look at it from a PLM professional's point of view, is let's start first, unlock the information, and then build models from that, which then allow us to build applications and other things that take advantage of that information.
We come across the guests now and then that talk about their PDM, and they mean parts. Data management is so overwhelmed with all the attributes they kept. And I told one of them the other day, I said, you really just need to go back and start over on what's the key information of your company, not data, information. And the point I was trying to make is information is a contextual view, right? It's a set of data in a context, and that's what helps you decide what to do next. And I think a lot of people don't know how to transition from a PDM world to the next one, right? And I like your summary about, well, get your hands on your data first, and then work about on the information, and that can only help, right?
I think part of the issue is that we've taken so many companies have taken a IT approach. Now, I said I have a computer science degree, so I'm not bashing computer scientists or anything. Actually, maybe I'm bashing MIS people. I don't know, people that are more information systems. But we're used to, in businesses now, we're used to transactions. We understand that it's tangible. Where information, data, information, knowledge, right, the progression, we don't really have a good understanding of that as organizations. And I still remember back, this is like 30 years ago, having a discussion with someone at Hewlett Packard who was responsible. She was responsible for their, quote, PDM. We weren't talking about PLM then, implementation. She said, to understand data management in PDM, you have to be a physicist, because physicists are used to modeling things you can't see. And as I mentioned, I have a physics degree too, and I get I really understood it and still remember to this day, because information itself is not very tangible. So why we put it in documents? Oh, we make it tangible. Well, it provides context. Well, we're part of the context, right? It's in a paragraph, it's in a chapter, and so on. But then what's the use of that piece of paper or that book or whatever it might be? Because we don't really understand information as objects that have relationships and methods. Even though object-oriented kind of theory goes back to the 1960s, at least, I think really technically it's always been with us, but from a computer science perspective, it goes back quite a long time now, 50 years or so, but it hasn't really made it into the business world. And that's where a lot of the MIS, by the way, I don't mean to be mean to MIS people, but that, the history comes out of business execution. So that's why people really get ERP, because it's transaction-based stuff and it's needed and it's well understood. But if you go to most management business schools, they're not going to teach information as a value proposition. Going to teach it as a transaction.
Well, and I think you're onto something, and we're out of time, but we'll leave it for the readers to go investigate. Objects and transactions are really different things, and there's and I'll leave you with an open question. Well, there's way too many attributes that are actually relationships and objects. And so what I mean by that is they've been put into a system as if they're just a decoration on a piece of data. And in fact, they're data on their own, and they need to be modeled. Back to your web analogy of information and then different views into that web. I do think pattern matching and understanding how AI can help is one of those topics our users of PLM should get comfortable with. So Peter, it's been a joy chatting with you, and we'll look forward to the next time we interview you on the podcast, which I really hope is after the pandemic. So I'm going to be an optimist and say, how about June? Let's meet in 6 months, and let's say that the pandemic's over. Hey, Thom, back to you.
That's right. And maybe we can do it at one of those conferences where we want to do the live interviews, the Digital Enterprise Society Unplugged at some of these industry conferences. So
Thom and I have been wishing, this is our Christmas wish, is that we do this again in person instead of so remotely. This is fine. We can see each other as we're recording, but I tell you, I really miss the face-to-face discussions. There's other, you said it during our discussion, that there's other things that happen when you get together, right? Exactly. And you're casual and you're enjoying the coffee or some other beverage in the evening. You start having discussions you wouldn't have otherwise. And we all miss that. It's my goodness, it's going to be 2 years before we do it regularly. So my goodness. So Thom?
Yeah. Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much to everybody who tuned in and listened. I say it every single week. If it wasn't for the audience, heck, why would we even do this podcast? So please join us week after week for more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.